Hi guys, I'm Kyle, this is Emrys, Land Rover Series 1 Club members. Dono's been in storage for a little while now, and we're just going to take you through a few basic checks which you need to do before you take your vehicle out on a drive. So follow us and we'll point out the things to look for. First thing we'll do when just coming into the garage or barn or wherever you store your classic car is just have a basic walk around of the vehicle, looking for anything obvious, anything out of the normal, so oil, fluids, tyre pressures, does the tyre look flat at the bottom, anything like that. So we'll do a full lap of the vehicle, taking a look to see if anything looks unusual.
So we're looking for oil on the floor, possibility of fuel leaks from the tank, anything that just looks a little bit unusual. Get down and have a look, even give it a sniff. We don't recommend you taste it, just give it a sniff, see if you can work out what it is.
As you can see here in this garage, we've got the luxury of the vehicle being on a ramp, but it's not essential for you, obviously, to store or use your vehicle. It'll just help us to point out a few things in this video.
So we've had a look round. We're quite happy that there's nothing, there's not too... Land Rover's leak oil. There's no big pools under there. So basic checks, we think we're probably okay. So we're now going to open the bonnet up and have a look at our fluid levels under there.
Most engines, well, same as every single engine, oil, water and fuel is what makes them work. At the front we've got the radiator cap on top. Now we've just come to this vehicle, obviously it's been sitting for some time so it's nice and cold, but if you're ever doing these checks you don't want to open this cap if the engine's warm. So in here, have a quick look, have we got any liquid in there? Easy check, does your finger get wet? Yep, it's topped up.
Yeah, if it covers the fins inside there you're probably alright.
Okay. Oil filler on this particular engine is an aluminium tube just here. That's if we need to add oil, but to check the oil we've got a dipstick which is located towards the back left of the engine.
Bit of health and safety. Not recommended to actually get your fingers dirty on the oil there. We can pull that out and we can actually see that that's approximately halfway between maximum and minimum. Absolutely ideal. You usually find that when you know an engine it will have its own happy spot in terms of its oil level. If it's too full, you'll actually just burn it off. Equally well, if you're driving off-road, you want to make sure that it is up to a reasonable level. Obviously, oil starvation when you're on a significant side slope is a bad idea.
As we can see, we've just checked the two basic items. Nothing looks untoward, but we'll find out in a moment if the engine starts. So we'll leave the bonnet up because we'll be coming back here later. So now we've done the basic engine check, we'll take a look underneath and see if anything looks unusual there.
So we've got the added bonus of having a ramp here, but these checks are exactly the sort of thing you'd be doing lying on your back. It's not comfortable, but these checks are definitely worth doing. We've loosely referred to this as a bit of an H check. We're actually going to follow the line of the axles through the transmission and through to the front axle. Loosely, that becomes an H check. So what would we be looking for on the back of this wheel here, Kyle?
So, as you can see, this is all fairly dry and there's no obvious signs of fluid leaks, whether it be oil, grease or brake fluid. So the rear wheels are, the rear brakes are operated by a cylinder at the top and with a seal in there holding the hydraulic fluid. If there's any leaks from that, you'll see it by a wet sign or a drip at the bottom of the drum here. So we've looked on both sides and there's no obvious signs of leakage there. So all good from this perspective.
Yeah, just to mention any contamination which is coming down here, obviously possibly from your brake system, that's going to be a lack of pressure, but also any fluid on your brake drums is bad news. It will reduce your brake efficiency significantly.
Okay, and while we're on the subject of fluids, which will be quite a common theme as we go throughout the vehicle because the vehicle operates on a number of fluids in order to make it work, we've got our rear dampers. These are oil filled and as they get older they can what's called mist up. There's just a very, very slight bit here, just wiping my finger over it. Nothing I would be concerned about, but as they get older you do start to notice them oiling up just a little bit more.
And just going back to our brake system as well, this is our rear brake pipe. We can see it's nicely clipped into place. If these are not clipped into place properly, they can actually start to vibrate and they can fracture. So they should be clipped into place. So a visual check on those. If you're on the oldest vehicles actually had steel brake lines, and of course steel does corrode. these have been replaced with copper.
So the axle driving the wheels is driven by the differential, which is this big lump here. That has oil in it to help it work smoothly, and with oil we could have a leak. We've got a tiny bit of wet oil leak here, but what you can also find is over at the pinion end of the differential, if there's any leaks from the seal which is in here or this gasket, because it's a two-piece differential, that will be evident in this area. Now, not all leaks are caused by fully failed seals. The axle actually has a brass breather, which is this little item just here. So as you're driving down the road, everything warms up, it expands, and the gases can't go anywhere if there's no breather. So what they end up doing is pushing fluid out of the pinion seal is the most likely culprit. It can come out the ends of the axles, but it most often comes out the pinion seal here. So check your breathers. If the breathers are clear, then you should be good. This brass thing has got a ball bearing inside. They're fairly cheap to replace, so it shouldn't be difficult to do if it is blocked. But this will need unscrewing because it's got a hexagonal pattern on the bottom. That can be unscrewed. If you shake it and you can hear the ball bearing rattling, there's a good chance it's free. You can, with giving it a clean, blow down the inside of it, and if you're able to blow through it without restriction, it means the breather's free and clear.
Okay, so working our way forward, Carl's just popped his hand on the rear prop shaft here. Most common form of wear in this is in the universal joints here. So to check these, we'll give them a good heave up and down and side to side, and we're feeling if there's any movement in these bearings here. These bearings can be greased. There's a grease nipple on the top side there. This should be just part of your normal regular servicing.
So there's a universal joint, as Emrys has said, at both ends. So checking the front, checking the top and the bottom of the prop shaft. But it also has a sliding joint to allow it movement when the suspension moves around. And this is greased via this point here. What we have done is set the vehicle up on the ramp is we put it on chocks so it can't roll anywhere, but we've left the handbrake off. This is to allow us to feel play in the system, and if it's all locked up, it's much more difficult to detect looseness in any of the bearings or sliding joints.
As we're working our way forward on the car, this is also a chance to have a look around and see what corrosion there is underneath the vehicle. This is lovely and clean underneath here, but that tends to be the exception with old Land Rovers. Steel chassis do rust. They tend to rust from the inside out, and they also tend to rust from the back forwards. So as we're making our way forwards, we'll be looking to see what obvious corrosion there is. If we've got any underseal on the vehicle, we'll be looking for any damage to that, and actually maybe peering underneath that underseal to see whether it's actually hiding any corrosion that we should be concerned about. Now that vehicles like this are MOT exempt, there is a temptation to imagine that it's okay to drive a vehicle that's not capable of passing an MOT. That's not the case. Your vehicle still needs to be solid and roadworthy, so it's not an excuse to get away with poor maintenance.
On the subject of corrosion, the springs on these vehicles are leaf springs made up of multi-layers of sprung steel. Now you can see this one, there's deterioration on these. They were reset and restored when the vehicle was done a couple of years ago, but haven't been touched since. So it's probably worthwhile to get an oil spray put over these springs to protect them from further corrosion and to loosen them up a bit. So what you may find is the vehicle's been sat for some time and corrosion has taken hold in the leaf springs. The first trip down the road will be a bit of a bone shaker ride, as is commonly referred to, until those leaves, which need to slide past each other in order to work properly, have loosened themselves up and they've got some of that rust out of them. As we're moving forward on the vehicle, we come to about halfway down. We've got the fuel tank, which is underneath the driver's seat. Now this tank is quite new, but the common areas for tanks to start failing is along the seams, along the bottom, and along the back edge when road dirt is thrown up from the rear wheels and allows the steel to corrode in those crevices. The chassis corrosion, which was spoken about earlier, as I said, is often to corrode from the inside out. Now this has had wax oil placed inside the chassis. It's been given a spray to control the corrosion from the inside. So that all looks to be in good condition, and there's plenty of wax oil still in there, so it should protect it for a good number of years to come.
Working our way forward again, we'll just pass the transmission handbrake here, the transmission brake. When we come around here, we'll be looking to make sure that there's no oil leaks from the gearbox actually into the handbrake drum. You might see a tiny little weep, but if there's any significant oil has leaked out from the back of the gearbox, it can contaminate the shoes inside the handbrake drum, which of course leaves you effectively with no handbrake. And while we're thinking about our oil levels, this is our oil level bung for the transfer case. So if we take that out, we should actually find that the oil is up to the level of that bung. And on the main gearbox itself, we've got a level check here, a filler and level check. Series 1s will also have a dipstick which is accessible from the transmission tunnel as well, from inside the car. While we're passing the gearbox, just something to keep your eye on is this here is your brake master cylinder. And this is a rubber boot. So we've got the activation rod and you've got the plunger rod and you've got the rubber boot here. Just worth pressing against that to make sure it's dry. Any fluid coming out of there is brake fluid, and leaking brake fluid is generally very bad news.
As a four-wheel drive vehicle has, we've got 2 prop shafts, so we've done our checks on the rear. The front just goes by the same procedure. 2 universal joints, front and back, check for any play in them, and the sliding joint as well. As we've prepared the vehicle to walk you through some of these points, we've got it already jacked up with the wheels off the floor. This allows us to do a number of checks on the wheels whilst they're off the floor.
On the front wheels here, we're specifically looking at any play in the wheel bearing, but also in the swivel bearings. So wheel bearings, we can usually detect if there's any play by rocking it across the axis of 9 and 3. That would find any play in the wheel bearing itself. And if we're going top to bottom, we'd detect any play within the swivel joints, which is part of your steering system. No discernible play in this. You will expect a tiny amount of play on occasion. That's all right. There's a certain amount of end float is acceptable in your wheel bearing. But if you can move it significantly with a bit of a bump, it's time to think about investigating further, either tightening them up, or they may indeed have started to degrade to a point where they're no longer suitable for use on the road. You could also spin your wheel as well and feel for any tightness within the wheel bearing itself. If the wheel bearing was starting to feel, you'd feel a roughness in this.
Bit of a grumble sound may be emitted as well. So we've done the checks on the wheel bearings and the swivels. What we can do is come round to look at the inside of the axle, the inside of the wheel, and as the vehicle wheels are off the floor, I'll push it all the way over. The chrome swivels, which is part of the steering system, are in good condition, again because this vehicle was recently restored, but these are quite common to start corroding around here and getting rust. Once you start getting rust forming on this chromed area, it's a rough area, so the seal cannot move smoothly past it, and what you'll find is they start to leak. These, after been sitting some time in a garage, can show signs of weeping, but as long as they're not running out of fluid, then you should be okay. Whilst we're on the hub area, moving up to the top, we can see the brake flexi line. This joins the hard line running down the chassis from the master cylinder to the brake wheel cylinders. Now this is a reinforced rubber hose, and being made of rubber, it won't last forever, and the rubber does decay over time. So just look for any perishing and any cracks in the surface of the rubber, which will indicate it probably needs replacing. The rubber pipe is terminated at both ends with a steel ferrule. These can often corrode as well, and if those are severely rusty, it's advisable to get those replaced before brake failure.
Just like we did at the rear axle, we'll be looking for any fluid leaks, either from the bearings or from indeed the braking system.
Steering system, we've just seen it exercised back and forth here, but one of the checks you can do, usually easier with 2 people, is if one of them rocks the steering, each joint can be felt for any discernible play at each point. If you put your hand, as Emrys is showing, grasped over each joint and the steering is rocked, you'll pick up and detect any play.
Yeah, you're feeling for any bumpiness within that any play at all. Also, while we're passing them, have a look at the rubber boot to make sure they're still intact. It's quite common for the rubber to fail over time. Once the rubber's failed, the moisture gets in there, it washes the grease out, and that means that the joint will wear significantly quicker. Again, we're passing our spring leaves here, exactly as we did on the rear. We're looking for corrosion between them. We're also maybe looking to see whether the leaves have actually started to thin. The leaves ride over each other, so it's natural over time you will get thinning of the leaves. Also something to be aware of, you might look at the bushes here. Sometimes a lever just popped between the shackle and the leaf itself, and a little bit of a heave. You'll feel whether there's actually any movement within that bush.
They're sometimes hard to detect if a rubber metalastic bush has failed. They'll be slightly offset if they've completely failed, but if it's only slight, you're more likely to feel it as a knock going down the road. And if you do feel a sort of a noticeable knock going over potholes, drain covers and things like that, it's probably a good idea to have a look at the bushes in the ends of the leaf spring. Every leaf spring on the vehicle has 3 bushes, one at the rear end of this front spring and two at the front end at top and bottom of the swinging joint.
This is in the early 80-inch. During 1950, the spring shackle points were actually reversed. So this is what we call a swinging shackle. This is a front swinging shackle from about May 1950. The swinging shackle's actually on the rear of the front axle. While we're passing it, just working our way along, this is the level bung for the front differential. Again, while you're under here, you might as well check the level in there. It's simply a case of winding it off, making sure that the oil is up to level there.
So we've done our underbody checks, everything looks in good order there. The next thing we can do is check that the engine fires up, so we'll just give that a go now.
So as Kyle turns the ignition on, we're expecting to hear a few clicks from the fuel pump just while it primes the system.
Well, that's a good result. So whilst the engine's ticking over, warming up, we can just take a look to see if there's any leaks from the top hose, from the bottom radiator hose, or any fuel leaks around the carburettor. One item that can be susceptible to leakage if it's sat for a while because it's a rubber component is the hose from the pump to the carburettor. So just check this is nice and dry. The last few things we can do before we head out on a little road run is check the lights. It may be daylight, but we want to check indicators, brake lights, etc. like that to make sure they're all in good order. When checking lights, it's handy to have an assistant, which is quite convenient with Emrys being here. But if you don't, in a workshop or area, confined space as this, you can see reflections.
We have side lights, headlights, main beam, going left, going right. At the back, we have tail lights, brake lights, indicator left, and indicate right. Spot on. Just a final check before we actually get out onto the public highway. We're just going to have a look at our tyres. Got a tyre pressure gauge with us, but before we get around to the pressures, we're just going to have a check to see what sort of condition the tyres are in. Very common if tyres have been sat for a while, certainly older tyres, they will start to get cracking. Sometimes you get flat spots in them. And we're looking for any cuts and bulges in the tyres. The other thing, of course, we need to look for is making sure that there's a sufficient tread depth. 1.6 millimetres is the legal minimum. However, 1.6 millimetres is pretty useless in anything other than dry tarmac. So we're looking for a decent tread depth. So a proper good look round every single tyre is absolutely vital. It's the only thing that contacts the road. Of course, we need to check our tyre pressures, which may have naturally deflated over time. I've got a lovely Rover branded tyre pressure gauge here. A nice bit of retro kit. In total we have 30 psi. Lots of debates about the most appropriate tyre pressures. Usually we'd say as a rule of thumb between 25 and 30 psi. Different tyres and different vehicles tend to ride slightly differently on different tyre pressures, but as a rule of thumb 25 to 30 psi.
That's all the static checks complete. The next thing to try is a short test drive and see if everything feels okay to drive. Now a short test drive to do a brake check and check everything else is out in good working order. So a little top tip when selecting gears in an old Land Rover, if you select reverse straight away, you get a crunching noise. But if you put it into fourth or third first and then select reverse, it goes straight in without crunching. So off we go, short trip with a brake check. Everything feels good so far, steering's okay. We'll find a nice clear patch and we'll do a gentle brake test. Yep, comes to a stop quite happily. So we've done a very short distance brake check to check there's nothing untoward. It was in a controlled area in case the brakes didn't work as expected. A little bit more to the test drive. We're going to go on a little short route around the local area which you know well, just to make sure steering, brakes, gears, etc. all feel good. And then I think we're good to sign off for a longer journey.